looks like a community you'd rather spend more time and money in. Now, I want you to think about this for a second. We got a lot of this kind of junk along the roads in New York State and everywhere else in this country for that matter. And, if you live around this kind of stuff, you kind of tune it out. You kind of really don't even see it after a while. We sort of take it for granted. But think about how a tourist would see this. What is tourism? Tourism is seeking out those places that are different, unusual, and unique in the world. If every place was just like every place else, there's no reason to go anywhere. The more Orange County, New York does to enhance what is distinctive and unique about this place, whether that's natural or cultural or architectural, the more people want to come here. The more Orange County, New York comes to look just like everywhere else, the less reason there is to visit. Think about that when you think about your future. Let's talk about some other stuff. Trees. I'm going to show you two streets, two houses. I want to show you two pictures. The houses on the two streets I'm going to show you are identical. I want you to ask yourself a couple of questions. The houses are identical. Remember that. Now, the first question is, which street would you rather live on? Would you rather live on this street or this street? Houses are identical. Second question, on which street do you think the houses are worth more money? On which street do you think the houses are worth more money? Third question, on which street do you think the utility bills are lower? Okay, could somebody hit the lights for me in the back for just a second? Just right, there's right on there where that red dot is. I just want to read something to you for just a second. All right, I have, it's a little hard to see. This is a new book. It's called Building Greener Neighborhoods, Trees as Part of the Plan. It's published by the National Association of Home Builders. I have an ad for it right here. Home Builders, this is their book. Okay, let me read you what this ad says. It says, quote, tap into the lucrative market of renters and home buyers who prefer and will pay more for homes with trees. Studies show that developed lots with trees sell for an average of 20 to 30% more than similarly sized lots without trees. Mature trees that are preserved during the development process add more value to a lot than post-construction landscaping. Tree planting and preservation pays off not only on upscale properties, but is even economically feasible on small, inexpensive lots. As it turns out, dollars do grow on trees. Now, if you could hit the lights for me again. All right, now what about this? Let's take commercial shopping centers. We've got a lot of strip shopping centers right here. Would you prefer to shop at a shopping center heavily landscaped with trees and bushes, or would you prefer to shop here? Now, I ask you that question, clearly it's a rhetorical question, but I've been asking that question for years all over the country. And the first place I ever asked this question was in a place called Baldwin County, Alabama, which is the southernmost county in the state of Alabama. It's on the eastern shore of the Mobile Bay, and it's the epitome of what you would imagine the Deep South to look like. It is live oak trees with Spanish moss coming down. And it used to be a very hard place to get to because they had a causeway that went across the mouth of the Mobile-Tensaw Delta. That's where that Amtrak train fell in the swamps a few years ago and killed all those people. And the only way to get across this delta was on a little narrow causeway that was subject to seasonal flooding, etc. But then they put in the interstate, Interstate 10. And all of a sudden it opened up this entire county to the development. It was pouring out of Mobile, Alabama. And of course they had no comprehensive planning, had no zoning whatsoever. We didn't like even words that began with Z in that part of the country. And so what happened was this. People started going in, chopping down all the live oak trees, 300-year-old live oak trees, and putting up strip shopping centers. Now, as you can imagine, a lot of people who had lived there all their lives got very upset about that. And so they proposed what at that point was the first tree ordinance in the history of the state of Alabama. Now, you might have thought they had proposed the end to Western civilization as we know it by proposing to preserve live oak trees in front of shopping centers. Now, people were saying things like, well, nobody will go to the grocery store anymore if you have a tree in front of it, like you'd forget where the grocery store was. But anyway, I got involved with this, and so they said, what do you think you should do? So I said, why don't you ask people what they think? So they went over to the University of South Alabama. They hired them. They have a marketing department that does public opinion polling. So they conducted a countywide public opinion poll, and they asked a whole bunch of questions, including the exact question I just asked you. Would you prefer to shop at a shopping center heavily landscaped with trees and bushes or one without it? And what do you think people said? By a margin of 92% to 4, with 4% undecided, people said they preferred trees to asphalt. Okay? Well, now this is not just my opinion or the opinion there. In fact, the Urban Land Institute, which is the organization of big commercial developers, has done a study on the value of trees and landscaping to commercial development. And what they tell us is that across the board, no matter what type of project it is, that trees and landscaping will add 5 to 15% to the value of that project. They tell us that it will increase the rate of project absorption. That means the stores and the shopping center will lease out faster in a shopping center that's heavily landscaped with trees and bushes than one that won't. And they go on to give 13 more reasons why that's a good thing to do. Let's take another topic. Let's take street standards. This is a new subdivision in a little town in Wisconsin called Middleton. That street is 24 feet wide. I'll show you a new subdivision in Manassas, Virginia, built last year. That street is 40 feet wide. Now, a couple of questions to think about. Which street do you think the housing costs less money on? First question. Second question, which one of these streets is better for the environment? Third question, which one of these streets is safer for children? Which one of the housing costs less? Which one's better for the environment? Which one is safer for children? Well, you should know that by adding 16 feet of pavement to this road, you have increased the cost of housing along that road by $7,000 per house, $7,000 per house. Roads, stormwater, two big, most expensive things developers have to build. Less pavement means more affordable housing, okay? Which one's better for the environment? Less pavement means less runoff, less sedimentation, less soil erosion, less non-point source pollution. Which one's safer for children? Well, according to the Institute for Traffic Engineers at the University of Colorado, the 24-foot wide street is 4 times safer than the 40-foot wide street. And why is that? Because people drive slower the narrower the street is. Now, I'm not talking about doing this on a state highway. I'm talking about in residential subdivisions. We require streets routinely in rural subdivisions to be wide enough to land 747s on. That doesn't make any sense for anybody. It's bad for the environment, bad for the business, and bad for children. Let's get together. We spend way too much time fighting about what we disagree about and way too little time identifying the things that we do agree about and then working together on them. How many people here have been to Mount Vernon, to George Washington's home at Mount Vernon? I'll see a show of hands. Anybody's been to Mount Vernon? Most of you. How many people have been to his boyhood home in Stafford County, Virginia? Oh. Which one do you think attracts more tourists? This does have an advantage. You can get a Slurpee right across the street, which is a good thing. Now, you know, one of the things you've done a great job of in New York State and lots of other places, Virginia's done a great job of preserving the houses of famous Americans. But, you know, we need to think more about the settings in which we find our historic sites and buildings. We need to think more about the settings of our state park, et cetera, et cetera. The setting is like the frame around the picture. It's what you see out the window across the street, et cetera, et cetera. You go to Mount Vernon, it's a wonderful place to go, not just because they have this house there, because first of all, how do you get there? You drive down the George Washington Memorial Parkway, one of the most beautiful roads in America. And then you look across the river, you see the same thing George Washington saw. And why is that? Because all the land on the other side of the river is placed under conservation easement. There's a lot of development over there, you just can't see it. Nobody goes here. Think about what would attract a tourist. It's what's unique, special, et cetera, et cetera. And in fact, we found in Virginia that those people who are interested in historic sites stay longer and spend more money than visitors who come for other reasons. It's true in other places as well. What about scenic views? You got unbelievable scenic views in this part of the world, scenic landscapes. Do you think people would rather see scenic views that look like this or like this? You know, let me tell you what the Urban Land Institute says about scenic views. They say, quote, you can put a dollar value on a view. Scenic landscapes are an asset not just because you and I think they're nice, but because other people are willing to pay to see the view and to experience the unique character of a place. Housing, hotels, offices with scenic views always command premium prices. The better the view, the higher the price. Now, you think about this. Now, you go to the beach and you rent a hotel room with a view of the ocean. You'll always pay more for that room than the exact same room on the other side of the hotel. Scenic views have quantifiable economic value, and you've got some of the greatest scenic views in North America right here. Which is one of the reasons why Scenic Hudson was formed, to try to preserve some of the great views along the river. They're going, of course, going on to do much more than that now. but scenic views have great quantifiable value. Finally, when you die, would you rather rest in peace or would you rather travel by U-Haul? Now, once again, the point of this is basically to try to point out to you, once again, the choices for communities are not about whether we're going to grow. We're going to grow. We're going to change. The question is how. You can grow smart or not so smart. You can grow with dignity and beauty, or you can grow in a haphazard and careless way that will destroy all the things you care about in a community. Now let's talk about a few of these things in a little more detail. First of all, let's talk about historic preservation. I think historic preservation is important because it tells us who we are and where we came from. Many of you probably read Thomas Wolfe's famous novel, Look Homeward, Angel, in which he penned the famous line, "You can't go home again." Well, sadly, Tom Wolfe, he can't go home again because there's the site of his house in this parking lot in Asheville, North Carolina. We need to do a better job of identifying and preserving those places that physically link us to the past. These are the places that tell us who we are and where we came from. Somebody turn the lights on for just a second. Just hit that button again, if you could. Let me just read you something that Daniel Webster once said about historic preservation. He said, quote, "The man who feels no sentiment or veneration for the memory of his forefathers is himself unworthy of kindred regard and remembrance." You can go ahead and turn those lights off again. You know, but once again, preservation is about more than preserving houses of famous people. It's about identifying and preserving entire neighborhoods and landscapes, which is really what you've been about in this state for a long time, thinking about historic landscapes in a broad sense. You know, there are other reasons why preservation is important, and I want to just talk about what a couple of those are. It's also important because of its incredible economic value. Let me just show you what I mean by that. This used to be the fire station in a little town called Madison, Indiana. And then it became obsolete as the fire station, and a guy bought it and sort of modernized it and turned it into a pizza parlor. And then, like so many small towns in America, this was a town on its way downhill. And then they started to think about the importance of their downtown. They recognized that downtowns really are the heart and soul of our communities. They're the cornerstones of our communities. And they brought in the National Trust Main Street program, and they started to work with this owner of this business. And he did this, physically linking people to their roots in the past. But guess what else happened? Within the first year after the restoration of this business, sales of pizza went up by 71%. You know, preservation can be very good for the economic bottom line. Now let's look at some nationally famous examples. Landscape preservation. This is the San Antonio Riverwalk in San Antonio, Texas. This is the most visited place in the state of Texas. This is the 10th leading tourist attraction in the United States. This is the basis of San Antonio, Texas's $1.4 billion a year annual tourism industry, and it's the single defining characteristic of that city. And yet what most people don't know is that at one point the city of San Antonio thought so little of that small river, they tried to put it underground into a culvert. They thought of it simply as an eyesore. Today it is the most visited place in the state of Texas. How about the Pike Place Market in Seattle, Washington? The most visited place in the state of Washington. Visited by millions of people each year, not just tourists, but residents as well. Sort of the epitome of Seattle. Nobody could sort of imagine Seattle without it, but yet less than 15 years ago, the city of Seattle tried to tear this place down and turn it into a parking lot. Most of you probably know that Disney World is the most visited place in the state of Florida. What's the second most visited place? There it is. It's the Art Deco district in South Miami Beach, the largest collection of Art Deco buildings in the world. An international tourist destination. Yet, once again, less than 15 years ago, they wanted to tear all this down and replace it with the same high-rise condo junk they have all down the rest of Miami Beach. Now, this is where all the new development is going. This is where the high-quality development is going. This is where the tourists go, et cetera, et cetera. How about the Camden Yards Baseball Stadium in Baltimore, Maryland? The most popular, the most successful, the most widely emulated sports stadium ever built in the United States. Not because it's the newest, because it's the one that looks the oldest and it did the best job of integrating new construction with the historic buildings and neighborhood that surrounded it. Now, what about some small town examples? Well, this is the high school in Gastonia, North Carolina, obsolete as a high school, but now it's one of the most successful condominium projects in that part of the world. They saved the building, told a story about their community, brought new economic value along with it. How about the train station in Red Wing, Minnesota? It's now a Hardee's hamburger restaurant. Been there since 1979. This is among the top 5 grossing Hardee's in the United States of America. They didn't have an architectural review board. They didn't even have any planning. They had no zoning whatsoever. Hardee's bought this train station in 1979, fully intent on demolishing it. And a group of women in the community who would have been in those days called the local hysterical society went to Hardee's and said, "Why don't you save the building?" Hardee's said, "Oh, good idea, never thought of it." And they used where they used to unload the luggage is the drive-through window, where you used to get your tickets inside, is now where you get your hamburgers. There's a meeting room on top. It's among the top 5 grossing Hardee's in the country. It's been there since 1979. Now, I think most people in New York are in favor of preserving the best of the past, and you've demonstrated that over and over again with many projects in the state. But I think the most important question for people in this state is this question: what are you building today that will be worth preserving in the future? What buildings will your children and your grandchildren fight to save 50 years from now? I ask that for several reasons. First of all, because 80% of everything ever built in America has been built since the end of World War II. And a lot of it's just plain junk, like this Kentucky Fried Chicken franchise we have here. Another reason why it's important is because, as Winston Churchill once said, we shape our buildings and then our buildings shape us. And by that, of course, he meant that our physical environment affects who we are as a people, how we relate as a community. You know, a well-designed place can elevate us or depress us, can create a sense of community or can destroy it, which is why we need to think more about the character of new construction. New construction. How do we get buildings that fit in with our communities? And in the gateway context, you know, you're thinking about tourists. How do you get tourism support facilities, hotels, motels, restaurants, shops, to fit in with the unique character of your community? Let me show you an example. This is Roscoe Village, Ohio. All those buildings, that's their Main Street. All those buildings, they were built in the 1850s. Show you their new Best Western Motel, built in the 1990s, right at the end of Main Street. Fits right in with the character of the community, enhances the community, becomes part of the overall attraction, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is a new motel in Elkhart County, Indiana. This is where they have the second largest Amish population in the United States. The Amish, as you may or may not know, have been leaving Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, because it's being overrun by sprawl. And Elkhart decided they didn't want to become like Lancaster, and the Convention and Visitors Bureau developed architectural design guidelines for new tourism support facilities. The Convention and Visitors Bureau did that. Why? Because they knew that people had a mental image of what Amish country looks like. And if you come there and it doesn't look like that, you feel like you've been cheated. You may come once, but you won't come back. So here's a new motel. Here's another new motel. You know, this may not be great architecture, but it fits in the rural context where they're trying to put it. But this is kind of what we're doing today. We live in a country of highly varied history, climate, culture, and terrain, and our communities look like they're being put together with Legos. You know, interchangeable parts. Ask yourself this question: does every fast food restaurant in America have to look exactly alike, whether it's in Maine or Maryland, Missouri, Montana, or the Hudson Valley of New York? Ladies and gentlemen, the answer to that is no, of course not. Any building can fit in with the character of the community. This is a brand new McDonald's, except it's in a house built in 1860. It's in New Hyde Park, New York. Prospective brides go to pose for their bridal photographs on the front porch of this house. In fact, even inside, on the spiral staircase inside. Now, you can't say that every day, but this is going on all over the country. Another example, this is a brand new McDonald's built from the ground up. This is in Stowe, Vermont. It's a New England-style building. And why is that? Because this is in New England, you know. And how did they get this? They got it because they asked for it. If you don't remember anything else about my talk tonight, remember this. If you accept off-the-shelf corporate cookie-cutter architecture, you'll get it every time. On the other hand, if you insist on something better, you can get that every time. And the point is, shouldn't buildings in one part of the the world be different from buildings in another part of the world? Shouldn't buildings in New England be different from buildings in the Southwest? Shouldn't buildings in the Southwest be different from buildings in the Southeast? Shouldn't buildings in a city like Raleigh, North Carolina, in their downtown, be different from buildings in a small town like Lewiston, New York? You know, even savvy developers are starting to understand this. This is in St. Louis, Missouri, at the foot of the Gateway Arch. It was built by a developer, you know, voluntarily. Why did he do that? Because he realized that when people think, you know, if you've never been to St. Louis, what's your mental image of St. Louis? You know, it's the Mississippi River, Mark Twain, riverboats, and you get there, and even the McDonald's are in riverboats. Gee whiz. You know, you go home and tell your neighbors about it. What a neat thing that was. But, you know, it hasn't always been that way. This is in Freeport, Maine, the home of L.L. Bean. This is the Gore House, built in 1830. That's the first McDonald's in the United States that went into an historic building, and it was in the early 1970s. They didn't do that voluntarily. In fact, McDonald's sued the city of Freeport twice, but they lost both times. But guess what? 3 years later, this picture was in their annual corporate report as an example of their good community stewardship. Now, point is, things change, and McDonald's not suing people for this anymore. They realize that when food is no longer the novelty design can be. But they'll only do this in those communities that are savvy enough to ask for it. If you accept off the shelf, you'll get it. If you insist on something better, you can get that every time. And this is being proved to be true all over the country. Now let me just switch my carousel here for just a second. Restaurants are in restored historic buildings, because that's just the way they do it there. And they do it here too, if you insisted on it. Now, but let's just look at a few other. Here's a typical 7-Eleven. Here's another new 7-Eleven. Okay? How about, you know, mini mart, you know, like a gas station mini mart kind of thing? Well, here's another brand new gas station mini mart. This is in Waitsfield, Vermont. It looks like a country store. This is a Conoco station. Why does it look like a country store? Because it's in the country. You know, they didn't want to look like the suburbs of New Jersey. They want to be like they're in the country. So they got them to build a gas station that looks like a country store. How about big box retailers like Kmart or Walmart? Here's a typical Kmart. Here's another Kmart, brand new. This is in Jackson, Wyoming. Has clock towers at each end, has a wooden front, it has an articulated roof line, it has a drive-through. They're trying to preserve their Western character, so they're even getting Kmarts that at least make a bow to the Western heritage of this community. What about this? Cellular telephone towers. Scenic Hudson had a great conference on this a couple of weeks ago. Now, we got 46,000 new ones. We're going to get another couple of 100,000 in the next 10 years in this country. Do they all have to look like that? Of course not. They can look like that. In fact, that's on the Garden State Parkway. I took that 2 weeks ago. They could look like a pine tree, a cactus, a poplar tree. They come in all kinds of different tree sizes, etc. And they could look like this. You know, everything you see there is a cellular telephone tower. You just can't see them because of what's called stealth technology. Two things you can do with cell towers: require co-location, so you don't have three companies with three towers. You have one company with one tower with three transmitters, and you can require them to be disguised, like you see there. Like the crucifix, that is a cell tower device. You know, inside the church steeple, on the water tower, etc., etc. On high tension wires, there's all kinds of things you can do to camouflage, disguise, co-locate, etc. Now you say you can't do this in a rural community. Of course you can. They're doing this all over the country. This is Chesterfield Courthouse in Chesterfield County, Virginia. A very small town. That's their historic courthouse. Here's their new Burger King. Here's their new Taco Bell. Now, once again, you know, I don't know that this is great architecture, but this does say Virginia. And that's kind of the point, isn't it? There's our new Arby's. There's Pizza Hut. And I could go on and on. Now, you say to me, well, Ed, you know, this is all fine and good, but it's too late. We've already got all this junk, you know, all over New York. You know, we already got all this crud. You know, it's too late. It's never too late. Community character deteriorates one building at a time, and it can get better one building at a time. Now, I'll show you what I mean by that. This used to be the Taco Bell in Fort Collins, Colorado. That was the Taco Bell until December of 1995. This is called the M30 model. And that means they can sit 30 people in there. And this is a fast-growing community. And so Taco Bell wanted a bigger and better M60 model, which probably you're familiar with. And so they wanted to tear down a Spanish colonial revival house built in 1930 to put up the M60 model. And once again, because this was a city with a plan, with a vision for the future, they said, no, we have a better idea. Why don't you give us the real thing instead of Santa fake? Ladies and gentlemen, this is among the top 5 grossing Taco Bells in the United States of America. It has won 3 national awards, and it is just one example of a community that's starting to get better, one building at a time. Now, Jacques Cousteau once said, people save what they love. People save what they love. Obviously, saving Sterling Forest grew out of a sense of love, caring, and stewardship for that incredible piece of land. But I think there's a lot of ways you can help create a sense of love and create a sense of stewardship. And one of those ways is to think about education and interpretation. Every community in New York has a story to tell. We need to do a better job of telling those stories in the landscape. Now, if I were to come to wherever you live and you were to take me around, sort of like we had a tour today, people were telling me stories all day long. But if I just drove around, I wouldn't know any of those stories. People had to sort of tell me those stories. So what I'm saying is let's make those stories manifest in the landscape. Make them manifest in your towns. Now, one of the ways you're most familiar with, of course, is by things like historic markers, interpretive markers, etc. The National Park Service, thank you, Carl Beard, is sort of the leader in this kind of stuff. They do the best job, I think, in the country. This New York State Parks does a great job also. Interpretation can also create, once again, a sense of stewardship. It can tell you why something is important. But I'd like you to think about some other ways to tell stories in the landscape, like by using public art, for example. This is called the Chisholm Trail mural. It's in Fort Worth, Texas. It tells a story of that history, of that community. This is where the cattle drives used to end. And this is telling that story. By the way, everything you see there is painted on, the bricks, the windows, not the cattle, et cetera, et cetera. Or how about the Costner Avenue mural in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania? This is in the middle of downtown Gettysburg, where until recently, only about 10% of the visitors to Gettysburg would even venture into downtown. And the first day's battle there was very poorly interpreted compared to the second and third day's battle. In fact, fighting did take place in downtown. It was an important part of the battle, and so they started thinking about that, and a local businessman used the side of his warehouse on Costner Avenue to get this mural put up, which tells the story. People were starting to come back, and they've done a number of other things as well, but people are starting to come into town to see these things, to learn the story, et cetera, et cetera. And when they're there, they just, by the way, go and have lunch somewhere, or they go and buy something at the local store, et cetera, et cetera. This is the family album in my hometown of Tacoma Park, Maryland. It's 80 feet long by 20 feet wide. It tells 20 feet high. It tells a story about our town. Example, Wiley's Ice Cream Parlor was the inspiration for the television show Happy Days. Every picture there tells a story about our community. You can also do this with sculpture. Get it down off of pedestals and put it into the landscape. This is called Waiting for the Inner Urban. It's in Seattle, Washington. There used to be a streetcar line that used to go right down the street. And these folks are waiting for it. It's not coming, but they don't know this. It's created, once again, I had to actually wait several minutes to take this picture. It's become a lovable object in the landscape. You can't see it, but on the right-hand side, the person there is holding flowers. One guy's got a hat on, another's got a scarf around, somebody's wishing it happy birthday. It's telling a story about the community. How about this? The radio flyer wagon in Spokane, Washington, where they used to manufacture radio flyer wagons. It's a piece of playground equipment, it's a piece of public art, and it tells a story about the community, physically linking people to their roots in the past. How about the Louisville Slugger Baseball Museum in Louisville, Kentucky? It's where they used to manufacture baseball bats, and then they moved out of town. Now they've moved back into town. They've got the second best baseball museum in the United States. Cooperstown's the best. This is the second best baseball museum in the United States. How about Falls Church, Virginia, a little small town. It used to be known as the hog capital of Virginia. Today it's a busy suburb of Washington, D.C. Don Byer, a local Volvo dealer, personally paid for this out of his own pocket. It's become once again, something that enriches the community, tells a story about its past, et cetera, et cetera. You know, public art can be fun, it can be interesting, it can be whimsical. You can do a lot of neat things with public art. And, you know, every small town in New York's probably got some building with a big blank side to it like this. What could you do with something like that? Well, you might be able to do something like this. That's called Tunnel Vision by the artist Blue Sky. Yes, they finally had to put up a sign there because people were trying to drive into this. You know, a Trump Lloyd mural. And a lot of